Call David Seymour.
Mr Speaker, what a debate, and could I also tribute the fabulous speakers that went before me, and I reiterate what Peter Dunn says, that I greatly enjoy working with the other support parties. Kia ora and thank you. I also would like to pay tribute to the Minister of Finance, following on from what Peter Dunn said. He is a man with a heart and with a vision, and is changing the way government operates from handing money out here, there and everywhere to having government as an organisation focused on outcomes. Mr Speaker, this budget is an example of stable centre-right government. In the Epsom electorate, that's what we vote for. In the Epsom electorate, we're quite comfortable with choosing the government, and the fact is that that's what we've done for 2 out of the last 3 elections. But that's also why Andrew Little's speech was so negative and so barren. You would think he was speaking in the parliament of a sub-Saharan country. He had no policy because he has waged a scorched earth policy on nearly every policy that his party had at the last election, and some of the members opposite should check, because there's so many of them away, they may well be having a spill as we speak. I remember once upon a time, Mr Speaker, when the Greens were a party focused on the environment. I think we saw very, very clearly today that that was no longer the case. Not mentioned once in that speech. And, Mr Speaker, I always enjoy the speeches from the leader of New Zealand First, and how fitting that he should be back with split ends in the 80s, a time when he himself showed great promise. Today he sits with a group of people who probably up until today thought that the budget was a brand at Countdown. Too bad, so sad. But Mr Speaker, there's one positive I'd like to really emphasise we've got him going now. There's one positive that I would really like to emphasise, and that is the announcement in this budget that there will be funding for 2 new partnership school kurahorua as early as next year. And this policy has been a litmus test for one of the darkest elements of our otherwise green and pleasant land. How do we treat people who make tremendous sacrifices to go out alone, to swim upstream, to do something different, to help the next generation of children? And the sad thing is that the opposition, some members of the educational sector, some members of the press, have shown us the darkest underbelly of our tall poppy culture. They have had a litany of false claims to try and knock down these heroic and innovative New Zealanders opening up new schools. They said the model failed overseas until they were overwhelmed by evidence to the contrary everywhere else that this model has been tried. They said that the schools would skim the most able students, and what we've discovered is that they have taken some of the students who were not even attending a school the previous year. Mr Speaker, I opened my maiden speech with a quote from one such student who said to me, "I never thought I was smart until I came here, and last I heard she was well on track for a university scholarship." That is what these educational innovators are doing. But then the critics said that they would be under-resourced. Then they said they would be over-resourced. And once again, we presented the evidence comprehensively demonstrating that that was not the fact. What the facts are that we are taking some of the most vulnerable New Zealand children and putting them into environments where they are engaged, where they learn, they get skills which lead to qualifications, those qualifications lead to jobs which will turn into careers and ultimately allow those New Zealanders to feel good about themselves. That's what it's about, Mr Speaker. That's one of the ACT Party's answers to the difficulty of child poverty. And wouldn't it be nice, Mr Speaker, if from time to time some of those opponents, instead of showing us the darkest underbelly of tall poppy syndrome, could actually be a little bit supportive. But I digress, and I take the time to salute some of those heroic New Zealanders in this movement: the Alwyn Pools, the Nick Hydes, the Sita Salupes, the Raywin Tippenays, the Catherine Isaacs, the Michael Jones, and even Willie Jackson, who have joined the movement for more choice in education for the most vulnerable New Zealanders. The opposition go on here, there we go again, there you go again, nitpicking the negatives. The fact is that all of the schools that have been open for more than 1 year are above their guaranteed minimum roll, except one, which is a primary school where children start throughout the year. They cannot handle the facts, but their negativity is bottomless, and you should be ashamed. You should be supporting this initiative instead of giving us bottomless nitpicking and negativity. Shame on you. We had many complaints in the lead up to this budget about whether or not the government would make surplus. And what an approach of short-termism that, unfortunately, I have to say the government has bought into somewhat as well. How many people remember whether the government was in surplus 15 years ago? Well, I'll tell you what people will remember about this budget 15 years hence, and that is, what is superannuation looking like? As people live longer, about 1 extra year per decade, as we go from 5 workers per retiree in 2006 to many more, down to 2, by 2060, when government debt is forecast to approach 198% of GDP by the time current university students retire. People will be looking back at this budget and asking, were we prepared to look into the future and confront our challenges, or did we kick the can down the road for 1 more year? An act solution, which some around this House are keen to support, is to put it to the public, to put up some options and let the public vote on the future of superannuation. If we can afford $26 million to do this for the flag, then we can afford to have a public referendum on fiscal sustainability and intergenerational fairness. And if only the Green Party would also support that. We could have sent a message to business about the future of capital investment and productivity, instead of continuing to issue corporate welfare, which fundamentally assumes that people in Wellington know how best to allocate resources in new and complex ventures. We could have reduced new spending allowances by 10% a year, and that would have allowed us to send a message to business in a country where we have one of the highest effective tax rates on capital, that every year for the next 8 years we will drop company tax rates 1 point until we get to 20% and become competitive with where other countries such as Scandinavian countries are now in terms of company tax. What about income tax? We've heard so much about people in poverty, people bringing up children in poverty. How about sparing just a moment for the hundreds of thousands of New Zealanders who have saved, sacrificed, waited, delayed and had children much later in life? What about relief for them? What we could have done at a time when the Minister of Finance is complaining that there is so little extra revenue from fiscal drag is actually we could have gone and indexed tax thresholds for income to inflation. What that would have done would have been a very small impact in the years to come, but as inflation resumes, it would have actually reduced the tax burden on working families in higher tax brackets, and it would have made taxation more honest, because instead of stealthily taking $1,036 out of the average household in the last 4 years, the government would have to be open and honest about its tax changes. Nonetheless, we have not had that initiative today. We will have to hope for it in the future. But most fundamentally is the RMA. And the fact is that inappropriate subdivision is a phrase that appears 156 times in the 900-page document that governs land use in New Zealand. Well, it's good to discover that the government is the largest land speculator in Auckland. It's good they're releasing 430 hectares, but what about the other 270 million hectares of New Zealand, 0.7% of which have actually been built on, that are deemed inappropriate subdivision? What about unleashing some of that land? And unfortunately, I have to disagree with my friend and colleague Peter Dunn. Three of those that phrase appears 3 times in the principles sections 6 and 7. Small wonder that there is a shortage of land on which to build, and the housing affordability problem is real. Mr. Speaker, I would like to finish by thanking my National Party colleagues, particularly the Prime Minister, the Deputy Prime Minister, and the wonderful Minister of Education, with whom it is a pleasure to work. Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker.